the Baen Free Radio Hour.
On the podcast, a star empire in the crosshairs, a cornucopia of short space opera, and a sextet of unlikely compatriots, plus part 2 of DJ Butler's conversation with Charles E. Gannon, and we continue our ongoing audiobook serialization of John Ringo's Live Free or Die, all right now. Welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour. It's a pleasure to have you along. I am Baen Associate Editor and your podcast host, David Afsharirad. Today we bring you part 2 of our discussion with Charles E. Gannon about his new epic fantasy novel, This Broken World. But first, the news. A fresh batch of e-arcs are in, and they are doozies. First up, A Call to Insurrection by David Weber, Timothy Zahn, and Thomas Pope. This is a new installment in the Honorverse adjacent Manticore Ascendant series. Turmoil strikes the Star Empire. Not long ago, the Star Kingdom of Manticore was a small, unimportant interstellar backwater. Now, Manticore has become a target. The Star Kingdom isn't certain who is attacking it or why, but one thing is certain. Manticore needs a capable space navy, and it needs allies such as the relatively nearby Republic of Haven and the powerful, experienced Endermani Empire. Enter Travis Long and his wife Lisa. It is their task to build that navy. Opportunity for Manticore beckons if Travis and Lisa can manage to navigate the fires of interstellar insurrection. Next up is a Druadaen Universe Constellation Volume 5 by Sharon Lee and Steve Miller. Storytelling on an epic scale. For more than 30 years, the Druadaen Universe novels by Sharon Lee and Steve Miller have captivated readers with their unique blend of action-adventure, science fiction, and interpersonal relationships. Sure to delight longtime fans and newcomers alike, these 10 tales highlight why the nationally best-selling Druadaen Universe novels are treasured by space opera aficionados, with amazing settings, strong characterizations, compelling romance, and edge-of-the-chair action in stories that range from cosmic to comic. And finally, Library of the Sapphire Wind by Jane Linskold. Instead of mentors, they got monsters. That's what Zirak, Varys, and Grunwald think when 3 strange creatures shimmer into being within the circle of Hetua Shrine. And why shouldn't they? After all, they've never seen humans before. Margaret Blake, Peg Gallegos, and Tessa Brown are equally astonished, but also better prepared. A widely varied course of reading material has intellectually primed them for the idea that other worlds, even other worlds where people with traits more commonly ascribed to animals, may exist. But despite their differences, these mentors and inquisitors must join forces to solve an overriding mystery. Their first task, find the Library of the Sapphire Wind, destroyed years before. There, they may find out how to ask the right questions to save themselves and the land of Overwhere itself. That's A Call to Insurrection, a Druadaen Universe Constellation Volume 5, and Library of the Sapphire Wind, all available now as e-arcs only at Baen.com. As most of you have probably heard, the U.S. is facing labor shortages and supply chain issues affecting everything from toaster ovens to toilet paper. Unfortunately, these issues have affected us here at Baen as well. Although not with the toaster oven or the toilet paper, we're good on both those counts. Thank you very much. However, as a result of issues beyond our control, the October trade paperbacks have been delayed. That is Gunfight on Europa Station and In Fury Born, which I talked about last week. These titles should be available in their trade paperback format soon, and we apologize for the delay. However, the ebooks are for sale now, so you don't have to wait for a physical copy. You can go to Baen.com or wherever you get your ebooks and download the books today. We're keeping an eye on these issues with the November and December titles, and we'll keep you posted if they are delayed. Though again, the ebooks for those will also be available on their on-sale scheduled date. DRM free at Baen.com, of course. Head on over to Baen.com and check out this month's Charles E. Gannon November ebook sale. To celebrate the release of his new novel, This Broken World, we're offering up a cornucopia of savings on Gannon's backlist. Save $2 per book on the award-winning Kane Riordan series and $1 per book on other Gannon backlist titles. The sale ends November 30th, 2021, and these prices are available wherever Baen ebooks are sold. And that's it for the news. Now for part 2 of DJ Butler and Charles E. Gannon's discussion about This Broken World. If you missed part 1, check out last week's episode.
So let's talk a little more about Druadaen. So he becomes, practically speaking, an orphan at 9 or so. What happens to him? We already said he wants to become a legionnaire. That's not how it develops. He's brave enough, he's clever enough to be a legionnaire. He kind of has a moment of military heroism early on. He absolutely has a heroic moment. How does his career unfold if it's not in the Legion then?
First of all, he's consigned to the archives, the archive recondite, which is you'll notice it's not secret, but it is recondite, which sort of combines the idea of not well known and probably off the beaten track, but it contains secret knowledge. There's inside it something that he learns of called the hidden archive, which we still don't know a whole lot about by the time we get to the end of the book. That is quite intentional. It is one of the guns that I've put, one of the Ibsen-esque guns that I have put on the mantle. It will come down. It will shoot eventually, just not yet. But he becomes an archivist or an assistant to the archivist, which is part of what fuels his knowledge. The more he reads, the more he realizes that there's stuff that just doesn't make sense in the world. That's really, to some extent, where it comes from. And then when he should be able to go into the Legion, he is continued there. However, in continuing there, he's made what's called a courier. And what they are is that this is not just a lending library, so to speak. It's actively acquiring things, and sometimes it acquires things from very dangerous places, and this gives him an opportunity to sort of he needs to be able. You need to be, I guess you could say, a generalist, a bit of a jack of all trades to be successful at that. When he finally gets to the end of that, and he then thinks, finally, now they told me I had to do this for 3 years, but then they were sure that I would get a legionnaire's position after this, a legionnaires position. And it turns out that there was small print we didn't see at the time, which was that, no, we can get you a military billet. And he's not made a legionnaire. He's made an outrider. Outriders are what you would call, I guess, the equivalent of borderers, watchers, scouts, sometimes not covert operatives in the sense that they are not that they're trying to imitate other people, but it is important that they should be able to, at least on a superficial level, blend in to another culture if they have reason to be there, that they are not, they do not carry the flag. Their job usually involves decidedly not carrying the flag. And that becomes, and it is through that job that he has that experience on the plane that we're talking about, because when he's on the planes, he's operating as a courier, as an outrider. And throughout the entire story, that is technically his job. But after he comes back from that, he's piled up so much leave and he had so much back pay that he says, well, I want to answer one of these questions. So he goes back there and he has to find people to essentially, go with him, because he can't do this on his own. So if there is the model of the quote party, it is, or an adventurer band, it's to protect a guy who is going out to try to find why the world is broken, and not not there is one point where it is literally going to an old ruin and seeking out old knowledge. But for the most part, he just wants to get close enough to observe things that are just simply legend or hearsay amongst most of the people. How do the Urge live?
Yeah.
Where do they get their food from? Because every 10 years they come ravening out of the mountains.
Yeah.
But they never gathered enough food that we could ever see over those 10 years to come ravening out. But they need to come ravening out. How the heck does that make sense? How do you grow that population large enough to be literally a horde? They turn that into, there's a verb, it's hoarding. When one comes out as a horde, spelled with an E after the D, not an A in front of the R. And this is one of this, and this just leads him to other things, other inconsistencies. It makes no sense that a dragon, that a giant would be able to stand erect without passing out, because the blood flow. I mean, they've got to be something's got to make that happen, and other things that he looks at seem to be impossible. So that's how things evolve, and in the course of it, his companions, the group that he's with, become less and less motivated by money and more sort of uneasily convinced that this crazy guy might be onto something, which to me was a fun transition to write.
To the point where late in the book he confronts them and basically says, look, you got to get in or get out. This is where I'm going. I'm exploring these conundrums where we're well beyond the Urgen at that point, right? Mm-hmm. And if you really don't, because they I don't want to spoil anything, but he overhears some conversations in which they're sort of expressing, I mean, it's like any company or team, right? There's water cooler talk. People will grumble even when they don't really mean it. Right, they're in, but they're still going to say, we could have got paid more or whatever. And he says, look, you're in or you're out. And they say, oh, okay, we're in. Whereas at first, they are clearly in it for the money. They sort of, in fact, in the way they meet, they sort of manipulate him to their advantage.
He is not always the sharpest knife in the drawer because he grew up in a very, very protected environment.
Well, I like that. There's a little bit of an element of I don't know if it's naivete, maybe, but he wants to deal with the world in a straightforward way, and he sort of expects the world to deal with him in a straightforward way. And in fact, you talk about these problems. The fundamental challenge is the world says one thing and does another. Right, it tells one story about the Urgen, the bent, right, and then you go, but that can't be the whole story, because how come, like, is there some giant bowl full of orc food underground, and there's like a horde that builds up every 10 years and they come spilling out, right? And in fact, we don't really.
And then why would they go if the bowl stays filled? Why would they leave?
They're there, yeah. So very good. So that's the first conundrum, right? Is hey, and so it's I love it. It's the story is driven by his curiosity, and so they go and they have and I want to make sure I'm emphasizing this for the listeners too. These are adventure stories, So they go and they have something like a dungeon crawl. They go into the underworld.
Yes, you could call it that. Yeah, you could call it that.
Yeah, sort of to rescue an orc.
Well, although like no dungeon probably anybody's ever been in. But go ahead, yeah.
And it's got monsters that attack them, and hiding from pursuit, and battling an orc shaman, underground. So I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but that's sort of the first conundrum. And I will say he doesn't really, I think this is a wonderful philosophical point. He doesn't necessarily solve the conundrums. He sees them more clearly is what he does. He sees that there's more complexity. He eliminates answers. Well, it isn't because of X. It isn't because of Y. Is it maybe that other thing? He hears about something called the root. And maybe we'll talk about cosmology in a minute, but the denizens of the undergloom have some kind of connection with the spirit world, and it appears to be something called the root. Well, is it that? Does that thing spew out? Well, we don't actually get an answer, right? We get more sophisticated questions, which I think is wonderfully true to at least my experience. So that's okay. So Orcs is or Urgen is question one. What's his second dilemma then?
The second dilemma is the one that I sort of, because they encounter some creatures in the what are called the under, and some of the creatures that come on, there's the under gloom, which is the upper levels, and then or upper regions, I guess you could say. And the more adapted, for a variety of reasons, that species are to the deeper areas, then you move into a place where it almost becomes difficult for any species that depends upon community to really persist down there. And as a result of that, that's called the underblack. And some things come up out of the underblack which make which Druadaen thinks, so that must be the giants of legend. And he's told, no, that's not what they are. There's something else. So when he goes back after this, and he's returned to Donara, as he must periodically, at least in the early parts, and he has sort of not quite carte blanche, but damn close to it, free reign of the archives. So now he's going back as a researcher instead of a helper. And he does research into it, and he says, it doesn't make any sense. How do he know there are these very large animals that draw things around. Horses are not as prevalent as forms of moving in this world. As a matter of fact, one of the things that makes horses kind of I guess you could say more of a luxury is that they just can't graze anywhere. I mean, that's true in our own world, but here there are literally different grasses. And some are called sweet grass and some are called sour grass. Sour grass will put even a sprinkling of sour grass, but they will be a problem. But unlike terrestrial grasses, they don't blend. They actually, the different kinds of grass seem to be at war with each other. Turf, literally, I guess you could say. How often can you literally use the word turf war? Because that's exactly what's happening. And he so he says, okay, fine. So how do these things stand up? There are these large animals that move things. They don't keel over, but he notices how they're built, and because there are what are called natural philosophers who have sort of done the equivalent of like what Galen did with the human body in the Roman Empire. How does it work? You look at it as a mechanism. And he said, well, this is how the blood flows. This is why they don't keel over. This is why, it manages to distribute. And he says, well, then, I wonder, but none of them are bipeds. None of them are bipeds. And they shouldn't look at all like us, because a lot of these things have sort of secondary heart, coronary structures, or they have a whole bunch of adaptations in them. So he wants to go and find a giant because he wants to see what these giants of lore are, which he does, which everybody is now absolutely, this guy does one. The only thing you can be sure about the quests that I guess you could say that Druadaen self-imposes is that each one is more ominous in the shape of it than the next. And they do find a giant, and they find out that, once again, the conundrum is bigger than he thought. But they're totally wrong about who giants are, why giants are, and why they have the rep they do.
Yeah.
And in a real case of drawing the wrong conclusions from actions only seen externally. I would say the part with the giant is a little bit of an indulgence in that. It's like you know what you saw, but if you don't know why, you may not really understand it. You will only know what you saw. And that's certainly the thing that comes to pass in that second conundrum.
Yeah, I like that. He starts out looking at the Titan Drays are living, right? There are Titan
Yes,
Drays.
yeah.
But
and
also
they're different from what are called the supergunts. So Titan drays are literally immense, usually quadrupedal creatures that are responsible for most movement of land goods, and even people. So that's and so the supergunts are those species in the wild, which are almost gone now. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And no, very good. That's good. And also fossils, right? He also looks at a little bit at the fossil record, and does some thinking about that. So I like this. There's the sort of arc of his interacting with the giants. There's some kind of library work, some analogical thinking, right? So he's trying to build hypotheses or a mental framework to try and think about the question that he encounters out in the wild, right? The question, no thesis advisor hands him the question. He runs into in the underbloom, right? And so he kind of he takes his resources, and then he goes and ultimately has to meet the giant, right? And then it's delightful that I love the solutions. I think I love the way it's well, I like them objectively, but I also like the way it's consistent with this character who is it's the consentium, right? He's a more or less kind of middle class negotiated free culture, and so to kind of connect to some of the things we've been talking about, right? He takes this out into the world with him and says, look, this behavior can help you, and tries to kind of solve the problems not only of the giants, but of course the people whose farms have been smashed up by the giants, solve their problems. But I don't want to get too far into spoilers, so that's probably as much as I'll say.
Probably so, yeah.
So let's see, does that bring us to dragons, or am I forgetting one here?
No, you got it. You got it.
So
well, it's important to probably point out that the fossils are actually introduced in the course of the very first conundrum, and like as with any foreshadowing, it's where you start, but it's also where, in a sense, you wind up.
Yeah,
you come back to the rock that goads, so to speak.
Which makes me wonder.
Anyhow, yes. Next, I'm sorry.
Which makes me wonder if in book 2 we're going to have the conundrum of the sweet grass and the sour grass now, because I can see now that that's also a sort of an interesting question that I had observed but not thought of as a conundrum. So anyway, we'll find out. So dragons. What are the inconsistencies in the stories he hears about dragons? What does Druadaen find challenging? What's the conundrum?
Well, there are several. If you want to break it down, it's that anything that large, and they do turn out to be every bit as large. Well, no, they're not every bit as large as reported, although it turns out that there may have been larger ones at one time. What's happening on this world, essentially what we've observed on our own, humanity or any similar species that is a tool using species that has the potential for explosive population growth really does tend to crowd out a lot of other species. There's almost no way around it. And so one of the things he learns is that there aren't, as a matter of fact, most people think the dragons were all gone. Well, he discovers they're not. But in the course of researching them, a couple of the conundrums, first of all, if they are as large as reported, and he will discover that certainly it's not, somebody hasn't taken the size of something the size of a crocodile and turned it into some huge beast. No, these are huge beasts. The other thing is that, so question one might be, how did they move? That could be one thing. But the more difficult one is flight. So if you're talking about a creature that weighs at least a metric ton, maybe several metric tons, what sort of bone structure does it have to be able to fly? Because, like I said, natural philosophers, they've looked at animals, they've looked at their own animals just for veterinary purposes. They've looked at corpses in the way Galen did to be able to bring science forward in terms of, healing processes, which in this world are predominantly not mystical. There is not some mysterious economy of florid magic use, and it's not even called magic, for very, very special reasons, is a sort of rare application. It has consequences of one form or another, we'll say. But the bottom line is, so they know a fair amount about anatomy, right? And he's seen bones of some of the largest Titan graves, the ones that are larger than certainly the dragons that are ultimately discovered. But even their bones, the problem is now you want to take something aloft that weighs several tons on wings. First of all, wouldn't the muscles and wouldn't the tendons snap free? Because if it's active flight, then you're having to produce, you have to pump the wings to get thrust to lift several tons. Steel might be a good solution, but bones aren't going to be. And most flying creatures are going to need actually fairly flexible bones when you get right down to it for the purposes of flight. And I'm not here to go into anatomy or zoology, but nothing makes sense that any dragon should be able to fly. There's also this question that breath is attributed to them. And he's like, what the hell is that about? So he goes and once again, what he finds is nothing like what he expects.
Yeah, there's a whole series of questions, right? Like, how can they still exist? If they still exist, but they're this rare, how can they possibly reproduce?
How do they feed?
What's with this piles of treasure stuff, right? What's the point of?
Yes, I have a great deal of fun with that one. Yes.
Yeah.
What is with this piles of treasure?
Yeah, one of the fun moments for me, I think it's maybe not too much of a spoiler, is the dragon has a very short neck, right?
Yes.
It's a very short neck. It's more like a bat, maybe structurally, because of course there's no reason for it to have a really long, right? It makes it harder to eat. There's more mass to carry. There's no good reason for a dragon to have.
Absolutely. And if you're actually going to carry something away, you want, and also the sort of shearing and tearing motions, you want something solidly attached.
Yeah.
I mean, look at a crocodile or an alligator. They don't even have necks per se.
Yep. And close to your claws.
Yep.
Yeah. So that was, and the dragon, turns out, you kind of alluded to this, but the dragon's a very wise, sort of sophisticated,
not to say wiseacre.
He sees through Kant, maybe from his position maybe it's more obviously Kant than from Druadaen's, but that's some fun encounter. And again, you get to kind of some negotiated solutions, sort of, at least clever solutions. It was a lot of fun. So now this is interesting, right? The final conundrum is humans. The final conundrum is humans. And really, maybe, what we're seeing is the unfolding, at least to some extent, of the conundrums we've been seeing all along with, like, Druadaen's career, and the thing we hear people kind of whispering around him we don't quite understand, and there are secret movers in darkness. But then we also come into this other kind of historical kind of problem. So, and all of this is tied together. I don't think we get resolution by any means. I think we're going to see some of these things in the subsequent books. But what are the conundrums? What are the human conundrums Druadaen is dealing with?
Well, that is kind of hard to talk about without spoilers. But the bottom line is that there's a period in this world. There are probably two inflection points, in addition to a very, very unclear origin. Apparently, there's a race called the Ulamanter, who are long-lived, have apparently some sort of symbiotic relationship with what might be trees, and are, but let's say they are long-lived, but the way they attain their long life is pretty unique and pretty disturbing to a lot of other species. Certainly, what I would call conventional humanity. and probably would be for a lot of conventional humanity now, judging from certain attitudes that persist. So you have a very unclear origin, but the origins are someplace back behind what's left of the recorded history of the Ulamantra. The Ulamantra ultimately sort of undo themselves at some later point, and that's sort of the end of a historic era. Then there's a later point, and it's unclear how much later. There's what's called the cataclysm. The cataclysm apparently is a tectonic or planetary event which causes certain changes, and it's unknown what the changes are. But there's certainly were some land masses that it's not like, you know, the entire surface change. It's not like one moment you're Earth and one moment you're Pangea or something like that. But certain things go away, certain things rise up, and communities and ethnicities show up. Demographically distinct groups seem to appear, and it's unclear whether they were just products of things that arose in between the cataclysm and then recorded history. But Druadaen gets word of a place he can go to find out a little bit more about whether that is the case, what really did happen. And at the end, you don't know why, but it's pretty darn clear that things are not always as they were. That's not a surprise, but they changed with dubious speed.
Yeah. So I will point out there is another kind of Tolkien parallel here, right, to the sinking of Numenor and the bending of the earth so that Arda is no longer on it. Now, we haven't seen very much of the Ulamantra yet, but I think you're stealing from the best, which is great. Well done.
Well, I didn't even think. No, this is. I will say, just free for all. It is. This is not on the scope of a global flood. This is not on this scope of the world changes. It's for the most part, some land masses are apparently fractured, and others arise as a result. It is, and the cataclysm doesn't bring the end of a major age, not because the Numenor, of course, is really a very Atlantean parallel. It always struck me that way. This isn't so much that, because really whatever existed at that time hadn't left as large a market as the Ulamantra did, and apparently didn't leave a mark even as large as the Empire of the Silver Eagle, which was that next sort of phase. That's sort of the one. There's an imperial phase where there's an empire before the Dunaran Empire. They say it's not an empire, it's Consendium. And everybody else says, bah, it's an empire. We know an empire when we see one. There was one called the Balashan Empire, which is referred to a couple of times in the course of the novel. But whatever happened was apparently more of a geological event, in that while it certainly disrupted societies, it did not signal the downfall of a sort of world organizing, or it did not wipe out a great state. So in terms of leaving research and understanding of the world.
Yeah.
But but the records were lost.
Yeah. So the history as told in Druadaen's time appears not to be what actually happened.
Right.
Right. This is kind of the basic issue. His conundrums usually arise from a mismatch between what people say and what the evidence on the ground
Exactly. Yep.
seems to indicate. And this conundrum gets us into another kind of a dungeon crawl, but here's where we're specifically looking.
Oh yeah, I guess. Yeah, I guess.
Right. Okay. Fantastic. So what about cosmology? I mean, this basically brings us, to sort of the end of book one, because we're trying to avoid spoilers here. But talk to me about cosmology. So there's let me make sure I get these terms right. There is a great tract So I'm imagining something like an other world. If I try to imagine like a cohesive single other world, okay, and maybe this is the wrong metaphor. There's a great tract which seems to be kind of like the wilderness, and some people, druids, have a connection with the great tract. Maybe if you're a practitioner of animist kinds of worship, maybe you end up in the great tract. Maybe you're the powers you work with live in the great tract. Every god has a creed land, right? There's also the root, which we don't know what connection the root has to. At least I don't think we know what the connection the root has to the rest of these. And then there's the wildscape, which I don't know what the wildscape is. I think it's different from the Great Tract. Do you have a map metaphor idea for how these places relate? How do you think of them?
A map is the last thing I have in mind. They are they are different. Maybe let me go to the beginning. One of the things that happens early in the book, which is another thing which will become increasingly important again as we get to the end, is that there's a process whereby one becomes a member of a faith.
Yep. Okay. Good.
And it takes place in what's called an epiphanium.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, usually beforehand, a servant, a sacrist of that particular faith will have sort of had a relationship with somebody, and usually at about the age of 10, 11, 12, they're invited to come into the epiphanium, and at that point, the deity, if deity it is, sort of shows them the pathway into the creed land.
Or possibly.
Now, pardon me?
Or possibly doesn't.
Right? Or, well, a pretty rare occurrence. That's all we'll say. But in this case, a very foundational one. And the thing about it, to me, the thing to focus on is that these are all experienced in dreams.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that makes that is a major cultural feature throughout the globe. This is one of the few globally pervasive things, is that once you've been accepted into a creed land, that is where you dream at night. Your dreams are of going through this creed land, of being in that creed land. And beforehand, you're in a sort of safe place. But the Great Tract is not a creed land. The Great Tract is creation, forces of nature, who knows what. It is I wouldn't call it idealized, but certain brutish elements have been removed. In that it is, if there is a struggle for life and death there, it isn't very clear. Things hunt, things are hunted, things graze, and yet all is as it should be. It would be a very comforting place if you were thinking more in Zen terms, I suppose. The wildscape, the thing that demarcates wildscape is their dreams. Wildscapers, or these folks dream, I guess, to put it lightly, or to put it most directly, the way you and I would. Generally, they may not even be narrative. They're very often terrifying. They're very often jumbled. They're very often chaotic. They can be all sorts of projections of fears, of wish fulfillment fantasies, and there is no organization to them. Whether you're in the Great Tract or whether you're in the Creed Land, there's a sense that something's in charge. Mm-hmm. Nothing goes wrong in the Creed Lands, and that's where you go at night. When you dream, you go to this place that is not only when you sleep, it's not only restful for your body, it's literally restful for your mind, if that sort of thing is restful. But as you could imagine, asking the questions that Druadaen does, he's not going to follow the normal path, I think you could say, or you might say he's prevented from following the normal path, which may be a good thing or maybe a bad thing.
He seems to be invited to a door that doesn't open. It's a remarkable kind of moment.
Yep. And as other people suggest, and this is part of the process of this novel, this may not have been a rejection so much as a redirection with a purpose. And we don't exactly know what that is at the end, because then I have nothing left to write about.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. So that gets us to sort of one of the big conundrums. And maybe we'll just indicate that it exists and not talk about what it is. But Druadaen, apart from the kind of person he is, there are clearly some extraordinary things about him that we don't understand what is driving them, right? He has a strange experience with the gods early on. Maybe it's a redirection. Some magic seems to react strangely around him, right? So at least in book one, although he notices these things and asks about him, he doesn't phrase them. He hasn't turned his gaze inward to make himself his own conundrum yet, maybe.
He doesn't think he could be possibly that important.
That's interesting. Yeah, okay. The world, yes, giants are more important than I am. Dragons are more. Who am I? I'm just me. It doesn't matter.
I'm just a guy. It's not self-denigration. It's just simply when he gets up in the morning, he doesn't look in the mirror and say, I am all that.
You are
that's
the chosen one.
Yeah.
The scar on my forehead tells me.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So I guess I will phrase this as a question, because I don't know how you want to answer this. This connects back to our earlier conversations about genre, but also to this Druadaen and stuff. You know, one of the staples of epic fantasy is the existence of a dark lord, Sauron, Voldemort, whoever, right? Whose presence threatens the order of things. And it's actually interesting. Well, someday, probably not today, I want to have a conversation with you about, does epic fantasy have some intrinsically politically conservative tendencies, in that it is about protecting the status quo from someone who would disrupt it, like superheroes? But man, that's a whole other conversation, maybe. Here's my much smaller question for you. Is there a Dark Lord in this novel? Or what is the Dark Lord?
So that would be, I think it's safe to say, take a look at what we've been talking about regarding where the quote forces of, if we want to call them goodness, or at least let's say accountability, are. They're diffuse. There's no great shining city on a hill. Oh, I mean, he thinks there is when he first sees Tlanthu, which is the capital, a very old city, a pre-human city that happens to be now the first city of Dunara. But as we learn, there's a lot of, as he comes to learn with some surprise, there's a great deal more dissent in that city than he ever guessed growing up. By the end of the novel, he gets an idea of just how deep that runs. Yeah. And in the same way, I know there's always a trait, I guess, in epic fantasy of there's a sort of an intense desire to democratize, I would say, the forces of good. Mm-hmm. Not surprising, I think, particularly in the Western context of how would we really feel good about there being a supreme ruler who was all good and all knowing and all, etc., at the expense of our ability to explore our individuality. And usually, and I'm not saying that one couldn't construct a story which manages to do those two things, but I think the simple dodge, so to speak, is to say that at some level in epic fantasy, the forces of good are usually what makes them good, in part, is they're not inherently imperial forces. They're not trying to impose their will on others. They're trying to protect their ability to exercise their own will or just live their lives as they wish, whatever that means, whatever the nature of the community may be. And that usually the Dark Lord or whatever else is, so at some level it's diffuse, communal, and altruistic. And on the other hand, what do we usually have with the Dark Lord? It tends to be unitary, egocentric, megalomaniacal, right? It wants all things. It's the eye of Sauron. It's that thing gathering it in. I would posit that if by the end of the novel, there's even a hint of that, I would be surprised, because I think one of the things that's showing up in the novel is actually that, and I think this is where one of the things that makes it slipstream in a kind of subtle way. The further out you go to polarities of power, whatever they may be, they tend not to be so unitary. They tend to be diffuse. I mean, even if we think about the most totalitarian states on the planet these days, the ones that would like to look like they are in fact a perfect pyramid with only one being or one person or one politician or overlord at the top. It's rarely the way it is, and the degree of control is never as great as perhaps desired or desirable. And on the level of, if you will, good or altruism, the difficulty about any community, I think, or any society, is the bigger it gets, the more compromises that might be made, and you might find as much constraint coming from that side as the other. So I would say that intrinsic to the kind of the kind of, as you were saying, you say I interrogate everything, and as I said, when I find an interrogation that, as far as I'm concerned, doesn't necessarily do fantasy any favors, I'm really interested in subverting those assumptions that accountability, altruism, whatever you want to call it, is always inherently going to be the good guys or gals or folks or things or beings or whatever, just as on the other side, evil may not be. It might aspire to be as all-powerful as we frequently see in the books, but usually that's not how things work out. I think that these things, one of the things that I'm getting at is, if at the end of the books, and the mere fact that you can ask me the question tells me that, as far as from Dave Butler reading, it's like, so who's the big bad? And all I'm going to say is, as I started, stay tuned.
Yeah.
Maybe there is, maybe there isn't, maybe it's more complicated than that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't see him in book one, except that there's this really interesting conundrum around Druadaen, right? And like, where does that go? Yeah. So fantastic.
Well, and particularly because you could say the conundrum you're speaking about, Druadaen, the thing, we like to think that every conflict that could destroy a nation, could destroy a world, would somehow resolve itself down into, these are the forces of evil, or at least greed and power, hunger for power, and these are the ones that are not. Doesn't necessarily work out that way. And sometimes it can be two forces that have their own different takes on what needs to be done to protect things, that can wage terribly violent wars on each other.
No.
So another way that I'm in the process of subverting fantasy, as well as having fun with some of its, with poking holes in its tropes, but lovingly. I'd like to say I'm poking loving holes in the tropes.
And that's why I wouldn't say you're deconstructing it. And I don't think that you're denigrating the value of the willingness to personally take risk, or the value of personal heroism, or the value of altruism, right?
And integrity.
Yeah.
Integrity, personal integrity.
Yeah, fantastic. And doing all this in a gripping, meaty adventure story. So very it's a lot of fun to read. Well done, Chuck.
I hope folks will say, what's not to like?
Very good. Well, is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we haven't touched on?
I don't want to tax anybody's time more than it's already been taxed. I'm an author. I wrote a book. I could talk forever. That's what everybody fears. I'm not going to do what you fear. I've already done more than I thought I would. Thank you so much for lavishing all this time and these very thoughtful questions, Dave. As always, I've had a great time being on the show.
Hey, thank you, Chuck. Hey, once again, the book is This Broken World, out now from Baen Books in hardcover and ebook. Dr. Gannon, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Absolutely. And one last thing, it's not, however, when you look for the series, look for The Vortex of Worlds.
Oh,
It's the
okay.
first book in the Vortex of Worlds. And the next one, which I'm writing now, is called Into the Vortex.
Okay. The Vortex of Worlds is the series.
Mhm.
Book one is This Broken World.
And the next one coming is this Vortex, Into the Vortex.
Into the Vortex.
So maybe that's a little bit of a foreshadowing, eh?
Okay. Fantastic. All right. Thanks very much, Chuck. Good to talk to you.
Thanks so much for having me. Good seeing you, Dave.
And now another installment in John Ringo's Live Free or Die.
Three. Fabbit! Wathayat calmed as they cleared the gate. Fabbit! Is he in the dragon's tears again? Don't think so, Drath replied. I locked it up. Did you get the jug? Yes. Oh, hell, Wathayat said as his customs cutter approached. Ship, spinward crossing. Heave to and prepare to be boarded. We're getting hit by the nosies, Wathayat calmed. Just stay cool, man. It's all good, Drath replied. There's no special import duty on this stuff. There will be if they see Fabbit. You seem to be in compliance with all applicable regulations, the customs bot said dubiously. You are, however, officially notified of note of seizure by the Onderal Banking Corporation for non-payment of mortgage on the Spinward Crossing, and you owe back payment for parking orbit charges of 484 credits on Glaukad Station. I don't have that on me, Wathayat said. I've got 2.5 pounds of gold. Checking. That is acceptable to prevent immediate lockdown. Full payment is required before leaving parking orbit. Your ship is required to go to holding area ZA4 pending further determination. I have 30 days to challenge the seizure order, Wathayat said. He knew that one like the back of his hand. Correct. Your ship cannot be seized for 30 days. However, it will be held in orbit until full payment is made of back charges on mortgage, including any appropriate penalties and unpaid parking, including levied fines. Fine, Wathayat said. But I've got 30 days, right? That is correct, the robot said, spitting out some forms and handing them over. You are free to move to holding area ZA4. Have a nice day. Wathayat didn't even want to open his hypernode link. He knew what it was going to look like. But he had to call a cab to get to the station, since they wouldn't even let them dock. Captain Wathayat, this is Agent Gurinther, representing Onderal Banking Corporation. As soon as his hypernode link was open, everybody he owed money to knew it, and their bots went to work. I've got to make trade before you can get paid, Wathayat calmed back. As soon as I can move my cargo, you'll get paid. I confirm that I have been contacted. Any contact in less than 1 week's time will be defined as harassment. Very well, Captain Wathayat, Agent Gurinther replied. I see that you have officially accepted note of seizure. Your ship will not be— Got it, Wathayat calmed. We're done. Goodbye, damn it. That was a lot of bots. Captain Wathayat, this is Lurdurgle Company. You are 3 months behind on your— Damn, Wathayat said, closing the call. Varora Taxi. Captain Wathayat, this is the— Damn! Fortunately, the taxi bot was programmed to take metals in trade. That was one of the reasons he used Vororor. They took any form of exchange and no questions asked. On the other hand, he couldn't take the tube way. He'd checked, and all his bank accounts, even the ones he thought nobody knew about, were levied and emptied. Any money going in those was down a black hole never to return, so anything that required a hyperpay was out. That meant walking. Fortunately, they didn't charge for air for 5 days, or the security bots would see if he could breathe vacuum. It took him about 30 minutes to reach Kolu's. When the door dilated, he took a deep whiff. What a fine perfume. And all the usual suspects were lined up at the bar. "Wathayet!" they chorused. "Where's my money? You owe me a round, you welshing bastard. That Corbot you sold me was defective." "Glad to see you guys as well," Wathayet said. "Be with you in a minute." "You have a hell of a lot of nerve showing your face in here," Kolu bellowed from behind the bar. "Where's my 50 credits? "I have something better," Wathayet said cheerfully. "This had better be good," Kolu said suspiciously. "Let's just say that the Gordonaut fire gems didn't exactly take off, especially since they all went out the day after you shipped out." "This is good," Wathayet said, sitting down and setting a bulb on the bar. "Put some in some water, just a bit. I should let you try it straight." "Be a fine day when something can get me drunk," Kolu said, pouring a bit of the syrup into a cup and sniffing. "What is this stuff?" He calmed a moment later. He couldn't talk because his snout was stuck in the cup. "Dragon's tears," Wathayet said. "It's a rare and precious viand from a previously undiscovered planet." "Like you'd take the chance on going through an unchecked gate," Kolu said, shaking his head. "Damn! It's got a kick, don't it?" He pulled out a bunch of shot glasses, put a drop of syrup in the bottom of each, then filled them with water. "Here," Kolu said, sliding the shots down the bar. "Try this stuff and see what you think." "What is it?" Inger asked suspiciously. "Dragon's tears," Wathayet said. "Try it. It'll put hair on your back." "Sorry, Garkar." "Screw you, Wathayet," the mangy Glatun said, taking a sip. "Holy hell," he added, dropping the shot. "Another, if you please, bartender. That is fine stuff." "Money on the bar," Kolu said. 5 credits a shot." 5 credits, Ingar said. "You haven't even bought it from Wathayet. Hey, Wathayet, you owe me like 15 credits, 17 with interest." "Give Inger 4 for free, please, my host, and we need to talk trade." "Schmurg," Kolu said to the Rangora, "you've got the bar. Set 'em up. Drop of this, dragon's tears in each shot." "Got it," the Saurian said. "Don't know what you guys are getting so excited about. Try some sulfur petals." "I am not paying 700 credits for a barrel of this stuff," Kolu said. "No way, no how." Everyone knew that Kolu owned about 100 businesses on the station and the planet below, but he ran them all out of the dodgy little room behind the bar, and if he slept anywhere else, nobody had found out about it. It was rumored that he had a pile of osmium under his bunk, big enough to drive a battle cruiser. "Hey, you saw how they took it," Wathayet said, topping up his glass. "And I'm not going to get so hammered I say yes. 400 credits for the barrel." "Isn't going to happen. I need a hell of a lot more than that to get my ship out of hock. Look, I'll give you this. 600. Give me half now. I need to go get the barrel, and I need enough money to get it from the ship to here. You can have the jug I brought for free. You're going to make more than 600 off that jug alone. I'll give you 1 barrel at 600, and when I get more, I'll keep selling you that stuff at 600. You know it's going to catch on. I'm going to sell the rest of it at bid, but for you, my old friend, I'll lock in the price. 500. I think I've got that much in the drawer. Done. But I need it on a cash chip. You're asking a lot. What? He asked as Schmerg stuck his head through the door. The room was soundproofed. It was now apparent there was a lot of shouting in the bar. You either need to get out here or call in to Gork, the Rangora said. I can't keep up. What do you mean you can't keep up? Kolu asked. It's just Inger, Garkauer, Hathan, Fandent, and Bob. How much can they be drinking? It was just Inger, Garkauer, Hathan, Fandent, and Bob, Schmerg said. But Inger calmed Mangauгau, and Hathan called his pear brood, and Fandent called his ship. And I need some help out here. So, that's 500, half now, half when I deliver, and both on a chip? Wathayat asked. I'll go get the chip. Holy hell, Wathayat said as the tractor bot stopped. There was a line outside of Kolu's. Schmerg was now working the door, the Saurian towering over the horde of Glatoon. Go on through, dude, Schmerg said as Wathayat pulled the grav bar off the tractor. Watch yourself. The party is in full swing. Wathayat! About half the bar chorused as he pulled the barrel through the door. It was packed from side to side, and most of them were hitting shots as fast as Tagork could pass them out. There were 2 more Rangora Wathayat didn't recognize circulating with shots. Kolu liked Rangora because they didn't drink anything he stocked, and most species didn't give them crap no matter how drunk or stoned they were. The problem being when Rangora showed up for work already hammered. Then it was just call for security bots and clean up the damage. Get that stuff in the back room fast, Kolu calmed. We're nearly out, and when we run out, I'm afraid there's going to be a riot. What kind of connection is this? Kulo asked as Wathayat rotated the barrel up into a holder. It's called a screw, Wathayat said. Primitive planet. Figure it out. I've got 3 more containers of dragon's tears. I'm going to head over to the Mo and Uathas. If they haven't heard about this, they will soon. But I'm not selling it for 500 credits, that's for sure. Oh, hell, Wathayat said as he stepped through the airlock. Thabit was passed out in the passageway. Drast! Was up, the purser calmed. Where the hell are you? Unable to process transmission. Secure room, Wathayat muttered. He went down the passage and was unsurprised to see the door wide open. The purser was lying on the ground in a puddle of syrup. Fortunately, he'd gotten the cock closed at some point. As Wathayat walked in the room, the purser rolled over on his side and started licking the deck. Oh, get up, Wathayat said, pulling him to his feet. I need you to take a shower, for one thing. Kurgo. That's probably a couple of 1,000 credits of syrup you guys just drank. And spilled. And it's coming out of your share. Zzt. Never mind. He got the purser and the engineer into their bunks, rekeyed the door to his own codes, and got down to work. He dropped off bulbs of dragon's tears at 4 more places, and he had enough money to placate most of his minor creditors. Not pay them off, just placate them. The major ones were all on hold. He'd taken 1 barrel to Kulo's. Drast and Thabit had broken into the one he'd been using for samples, but they couldn't really drink all that much of the stuff. More had probably spilled on the deck, so call it 2/3 left. 4 2/3 barrels. He dropped that for bid onto the hypernet to see what happened. This is a rather unusual request, Mr. Tyler. Robert Lyle was a senior associate with Bertram, Hudson, and Slavins, a Boston law firm that had fought its first tort case in British court. He wasn't quite sure about his newest client, but when the CEO of Verizon calls and suggests that you arrange a meeting, it was considered wise to do so. The conditions and subject, however, were bothersome. While we do sometimes have clients who might have accidentally bent one of the numerous laws and regulations of the United States or international courts, we prefer— I'm not trying to break or bend the law, Tyler said, and I'm not sure I'm talking to the right person if you can't even get my name straight. Tyler Vernon. All I want you to do is arrange some perfectly legal purchases. I simply don't want those purchases to be reported as associated with me until they have all or mostly been completed, and they need to be distributed so as not to be obvious. This is quite a bit of land, Mr. Vernon, pardon me, Lyle said, and a large number of operating businesses, and you simply wish that the owners be unaware? I need it for everyone to be unaware, Tyler said. Totally confidential. I'm talking to you. You don't even tell your people who is doing the buying. We'll figure out some way to slush the money quietly. It'll probably have to be through shell companies. As long as it is eventually reported to the IRS, it's no problem, right? Bit more than the IRS for this level transaction, Lyle said. And we're talking about a good bit of money. Yeah, Tyler said. Money's not an issue, and your firm can't make the purchases directly. I chose you because you work some very big deals, and you can probably cloak the purchases. 3 or 4 other firms, brokers, etc., all behind proprietary layers. If the government isn't the issue, Lyle said, looking puzzled, why are you cloaking these purchases? Oh, the problem's the Horvath, Tyler said. It's the Horvath we need to not associate these purchases with me, at least for a while, as long as possible. Now you are getting completely out of my field, Lyle said. Anything involving the Horvath has national, international security issues. The government is generally aware of what I'm doing, Tyler said, and not against it to the point that they can find a policy with both hands. All I'm doing is engaging in honest trade. Now, are you going to take the job or not? Obviously, the commissions are going to be quite remunerative, yes, Lyle mused. I'm sure we can manage this, as long as we're not in jeopardy of violating bar regulations. But I have to ask, why do you want to own, how did you put it, every single square inch of land that can produce maple trees? Sugar maple, Tyler said with a smile. That is, as I say, proprietary. And there are some qualifiers on it. Anything that is currently on the market, buy first. Then concentrate on things which have been traded in the last 10 or 15 years and corporate holdings. Get as many of the new crew out of the area as possible. At that point, the price is probably going to be running up pretty solid, and we'll be hitting some diminishing returns, so the old families might start to sell. But try to keep other corporate entities out of the area. Most important of all, I want you to buy one particular piece of property for the absolute best price you can get it, which means it should be one of the first properties bought. Put the best person you can find on it. Research the target. Find vulnerabilities, blackmail, anything. Absolutely screw her. Her? Yes, Tyler said. I especially want her land. Make sure you get it for a price that she'll go for but still feels vaguely screwed. She'll find out how screwed later. I'm not normally the sort of person to screw widows out of money, but there are widows and widows. The name is Mrs. Angelina Cranshaw. We're rich, We never have to work again, if I can keep you guys from drinking it all, Wathay said sourly. And we've got to go do one more run to Earth. Then we'll be rich. Dragon's Tears was good. There was no question of that. But mostly it was new and different. Despite trading with hundreds of different species and despite Glatoon corporate departments and AIs that constantly strove to find the hot new thing, something truly new and different was rare. 6,000 credits a gallon, though, was just stupid. And it wasn't even going to make it past Glalcod. Think of it this way, Wathay said. We can't afford to get drunk on it, and we're sitting on enough portable cash that every crook in Glalcod station has got to be trying to think of a way to break into our hold. Fabit said. When do we make the transfers? No one bar on Glalcod station had been able to buy their full cargo. Tomorrow, Wathay said, then shuddered. Security bots on the way. Spinward Crossing, this is a Thelcow. The value of your cargo has passed non-secure storage threshold. To prevent misadventure in the system, you are being moved to secure docking bay 116-Alpha. Your cargo of Dragon's Tears will be moved to high-security storage pending transfer to purchasing parties. A charge of 196 credits will be added to your transfer fees. System overrides in 5, 4, 3... And the ship started moving out of its current parking orbit. A Thelcow, the AI for Glalcod Station, handled, well, everything. Parking, maneuvering, most transfers and commercial transaction assurance, air and water recycling, and, notably, security. A Thelcow saw all. You did not argue with a Thelcow when it decided something needed to be done. "We're surrounded!" Fabit squeaked. "Just stay cool," Wathay said. "We haven't done anything wrong." "This time," Drast pointed out. "And if the nosies get involved, they're bound to find something." "Then let's not give them a reason to get any more involved than necessary," Wathay said. "A Thelcow, roger that, override, thanks. We were just discussing the security problem." "My job is to stay one step ahead of problems," a Thelcow replied. Wathay got the tickle for a priority hypernet call and sighed. "As my bots should have pointed out," he calmed, "all bids on Dragon's Tears are closed." "Captain Wathay, this is Nizgal Gorku. I wonder if we could get together for a chat." "What?" Fabit asked as Wathay's hair stood on end. Trader Gorku, it's, a pleasure to come with you. Your ship is being moved to a security area at the moment. Why don't we have dinner on my yacht? I am conveniently parked right next to you. Isn't that a surprise? We'll be neighbors." No surprise at all. Gorku was certainly the richest person in the Glalcod system and consistently rated in the top 5 in the Federation. That he could get a Thelcow to park the Spinward Crossing next to him was no surprise. That was how the system worked. The Glatoon government was an enlightened Pluto democracy. There were various levels and branches of elected government that set general policy. Most of it was then administered by artificial intelligences like a Thelcow. There were, of course, hosts of bureaucrats, but most of them carried out tasks set by the AIs. But it was recognized when the basic documents were being developed that them that have gets. So, part of the assumption was that people who were more economically advanced would do 2 things: wield more power and work to consolidate such power. The first was, in general, not a bad thing. Persons who have been raised to wield power are generally good at it. And the smart rich tend to train their children to be smart about being rich, getting more rich, and generally tending the Federation as a garden. But not always, and not always for the general betterment of the Federation. So there were various processes in the basic setup that allowed for change, such as the election of officials that, at the end of the day, could override the wishes of the functional oligarchy of wealthy elites, if enough non-elite Glatun felt it necessary. And the AIs were, specifically, programmed to create niches and openings that have-nots could exploit if they were smart and ruthless enough. Thus, they could be haves. Some of the elites would slowly fall out of elite status, and there was turnover. However, if someone was an elite, and Gorku was certainly one such, suggesting to the AI that the Spinward crossing would best be parked next to one's yacht was no big deal. The surprise was that Gorku would take any direct interest at all. "Yes, sir," Wathayat said aloud. "I'd be glad to have dinner with you. What time?" 23:40 work for you?" 23:40 it is, sir," Wathayat said, pulling at his trans-collar nervously. "It's a deal," Gorku calmed, cutting the call. "Your hair still isn't going down," Fabbit said. "What's up?" Drast calmed. "I have to meet with Nizgal Gorku," Wathayat said. "Oh," Drast calmed. "You poor doomed bastard. We are so screwed." "Are you enjoying the Ndolul, Captain?" Gorku was a short-nosed glod like Wathayat. Wathayat wasn't prejudiced by any stretch of the imagination, but about the only snotty, stuck-up, long-nosed Gorku he had got along with was Drast, so it was somewhat comforting. The two very large waiters were less so. They looked as if they were suckled on asteroids. "Great," Wathayat said, taking another small bite. "Truly wonderful." "Well, when one is rich, one can afford good chefs," Gorku said, "and proper ingredients. The blag has to be very fresh. I had a ship bring it in just this morning. The reason for the query is that you don't seem to be enjoying it. Haven't eaten much. I assure you, I do not regularly descend to cannibalism, and both the servers are quite gentle for Rangora." "No problem at all, sir," Wathayat said, trying to take a larger bite. No chance. All four stomachs were rejecting input. "I am, of course, interested in the dragon's tears," Gorku said, taking a sip of same. "Lovely stuff. I assume you bought it on Earth?" "Yes, sir," Wathayat said, summoning just enough courage to defend never having to summon courage again. "And the Terran we bought it from has a binding contract with us." 5% of all dragon's tears subsequently sold by him to any Glatun or Glatun Corporation, Gorku said. "Would you like to hear the 7 ways that I came up with to get around such a contract? That was before my AIs became involved." "No, sir," Wathayat said, his shoulders slumping. Dear Captain Wathayat," Gorku said, bobbing his head. "I am not trying to steal your discovery. The same, however, cannot be said of my competitors. I am rather interested in Terra. Of course, I am interested in many things, you understand. But Terra is one of those. It has such potential, and of course is quite close to Glaucod. Now that there is, in fact, something of worth to trade, the potentialities increase. I simply wish to ensure that my companies are part of that potential, You understand? Most of that potential, Wathaet thought to himself. Yes, sir. What are your near-term arrangements? Gorku asked. In regards to further shipments of dragon's tears. Not what you plan on doing tomorrow with your money. I was a spaceman myself once. I'm to meet with my contact on Earth at a remote location on 238 at 10:40. Wathaet said, trying not to sigh. He's to have most of a hold's worth of dragon's tears. Do you know how much of his world's supply that represents? Gorku said. We have identified it as a plant product, probably a sap. A sap of what is the great question. There are over 9 dozen saps that are used for foods or industrial products on the planet. I do not, sir, Wathaet said. I will say that he asked me to involve people, such as you, in trade, sir. He wants our big boys, as he said, involved so they might get the government to intervene with the Horvath. Over dragon's tears as a product? Unlikely, Gorku said musingly. But he's apparently fairly smart. More likely if corporations are involved than, a small free trader. Although you will get wealthy quickly, you don't have the established contacts, the methods. Gorku wrinkled his snout in thought. If he's that smart, he's also not going to want to trade with a single corporation, the financier said. And he'll want more than trash Atasurk. I think he wants to trade for credits and buy Atasurk here on Glalkad, Wathaet said. Not impossible to arrange, Gorku said. If we have regular trade with Earth, going around the Horvath, of course, then establishing a commercial hypernode is a necessity. Very well. Meet with your contact. Make him aware that you have contacted corporations. When you return, we will have arrangements completed to establish regular trade. And as contracted, you get 5%. Thank you, sir, Wathaet said. Less fees, of course, Gorku said with another wrinkle of his nose. And the government will quickly designate it as a luxury good, which means higher taxes. But I think we will all make more than a bit of profit, and that is to the good, is it not?
That was another installment in John Ringo's Live Free or Die. And that's it for the podcast. Thanks, as always, to Audible.com and podcast theme composer Ruth Judkowitz. Praise, thanks, and gratitude to Charles E. Gannon for sitting down with our guest interviewer, DJ Butler, to discuss this broken world. And good night, Tony Daniel, wherever you are. This is David F. Schreierrod coming to you from a soundproof bunker somewhere deep in the heart of Texas. Join us here next week at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.